Thanks, Susan. This is an amazing, for somebody like me I think this is, my second week in being baptized in Zoom. This virtual space is all new, and it's pretty impressive to see how you all have done this so quickly. I will say, there's people on here, when I look at the participants, lots of friends and people that have as much or more to say about this as I do. So hopefully that'll come to the fore somehow. Yeah. And then finally, Bruce Jackson, who I wouldn't really know anything if it wasn't for Bruce Jackson, who's just a little bit younger than me, but he's taught me a whole lot. And he's in Buffalo somewhere on this call. He hired me gave me my first editor position. He didn't hire me, he didn't pay me actually. But I was a film review editor, and I've learned through the last, 40 years, a lot from Bruce Jackson. So anyway, I'm not going to call out everybody, or that's all we do, but it's great to see so many folks.
As I have from you, I got to respond to
that. Hey, Diane.
Hey.
See, he's much younger than me. You can tell by. Bruce is an amazing thinker, photographer. He has the best chaired professorship. He's the James Agee Chair of American Studies at Buffalo. So, say no more.
Well, welcome.
It's great to be here. So where should we start?
Well, I can remember us, that conversation when we called you and we were sort of trying to make sense of the position in this, and this question of what's going to happen when we think about the sort of witnessing, photography as a tool for witnessing our lives, but what happens when our lives become these very enclosed and cloistered, in a sense, places. And you were telling me that explained to me that the history of photography is so rich with examples of images from our most immediate life. And I just thought maybe that would be a great place to start.
Yeah, I think art broadly is about the most intimate, about the most ordinary. We could go through the history of photography. We could look at Emmett Gowan's or Edith's backyard where Emmett Gowan photographed, or we could look at Atget in the streets of Paris. We could look at any number of photographers who have photographed really close to where they are. And I think we can also look, and we should, at the poets and writers and painters who have done precisely the same thing. We're all plagued, bad word to use right now, but we're all plagued with the desire to go somewhere we've never been. And I always say we're always one plane ticket away from a perfect project. But that's the pitfall of shallowness, or it can be. And there's nothing more magical than figuring out how to make something right where you are, or right around what you've seen over and over and over again. And I think the history of photography, but the history of art and the history of great ideas is seasoned with that. I like I'm very influenced by Wendell Berry, and Wendell Berry has that poem, How to Be a Poet, which has that wonderful use of the word be, and it reminds me of don't be a writer. What Faulkner said, writers write. But what Barry says in there is how to be a poet. Among the things he says is communicate slowly, live a three-dimensional life, stay away from screens. We've already broken that rule. Stay away from anything that obscures the place it is in. And I think that the idea of photographing in the place you are in, it's all we can do. It's what we do whenever we photograph, wherever we photograph. But that's the choice. When you were saying it was 6 feet and then it's social distance, give us, tell us how close we can get, and we'll get that close as photographers. Tell us that we have to photograph from here, and we'll stand there. We can only make pictures where we are. I say all documentary work is local, because local is where we stand. And so I think that it is true that this is a hard time for some people to make work, but it's also a great time to look at what we've, quote, seen and haven't really observed over and over and over again. And the camera's a great way to do that.
And how about you? How are you responding to this moment photographically? Is it speaking to you?
Well, I think I'm photographing mostly the way I'm carrying a camera around. I am starting to I am like everybody else, trying to think what should we be doing in this moment as photographers? What is the record? What is the witness? I'm deeply interested in history and interested in the way that photographs, seconds after they're made, are documents of the past. And so I am thinking about that. And like everybody, challenged by, do we need another picture like X? Or do we need another picture of a mask? Do we need this? But you can't really photograph. You can't really make pictures if you're questioning whether you should make a picture. And I say this often to students and to myself, that, when you're making a picture and you're thinking, well, this has been made before, I shouldn't do it. Well, you'll never do anything. And we all have the choice to never show that picture, or to never print that picture, or to delete that picture. I'm still analog. I'm still using film. So the pictures I make, I don't see immediately. I mean, I use my iPhone, of course. I've just had goats being born in the middle of social distance. I'm photographing whatever's happening around me. But I'm also thinking about, what should I be photographing? I'm taking photographs in store. Taking them like a camera in stores, and sometimes taking pictures. But I don't know what I'm doing with any of them. And I think that's another thing about this idea of the documentary moment, or of what Welty called the snapshot. And she didn't use that. I think she used that as the highest praise, but she said the snapshot is now or never. And so I'm very much interested in the way that we only have one chance to take that picture. And I say in that essay you referred to that, for years I have forbidden students from coming to class and saying, I saw this great picture yesterday, and telling this story and then not having the picture. Mm-hmm. And we've all had that, the photograph untaken. So I try hard not to go home and think of the photograph untaken. So I take too many pictures. But I am interested in the long arc of time, and just the time that we've been in this experience. Mm-hmm. Think of how it's changed, and what, I like to think of those movies where some guy would be in jail and he'd make a mark on the wall every day. I think that's kind of what we need to be doing. Make some mark. Don't worry whether it's any good or whether anybody cares. It's your mark. And you can look back. The exposure is one thing, but reflecting back on the pictures is another. And there'll be plenty of time to do that, but there's only one time to make that mark. And so that's the way I see it. Now, everybody doesn't have to be making photographs all the time. That would be silly. We got too many photographs already. So you got to figure out where you fit into this thing. But I do see it as a way to, I guess, a way to experience the experience. And yet, we can't, you don't want to be so, you don't want to hide behind the camera. You're already hiding behind a mask. So you don't want to miss everything because of photographing. But I do think it's a time to process this through making images. And I think it could be a gift to others later to have made the images, responded to the emotions that are there. And we were joking when there were just a few of us a little while ago that photographs are merely illusions, and they are. And so we try to put in these illusions whatever emotion we've got, and the convergence of light and emotion virus and fear and boredom and excitement. I mean, what else is there? There's some other things. I don't want to creep listing them, but there's some other things.
That reminds me of the book, is it Marvin Heiferman, The Photography Changes Everything? And
Right.
one of my favorite pieces in that book is that he talks about how photography changes the way we see, the way we desire, the way we remember. But he also emphasizes that photography changes who we are. And I was just wondering, in your years of practicing, but particularly in looking at this moment, what does the practice of photography do for us? Let's say the images sit in a box. Is there something to the practice itself that has changed your life in ways, or that is significant to you in these moments?
Yeah. Well, I don't, I'm going to answer it, but I'll preface it by saying I don't always know what I'm doing or what, where I've been and how I've evolved. But I think that the act of photographing just makes me, I'm constantly looking and trying to make sense of the cacophony of the world by putting some kind of frame around it in some way. And even when I'm not photographing, I'm probably doing that. But I think it's a way to organize pandemonium in some ways, but it's also a way to organize like the perfect confluence of beauty. And sometimes those are the same things. And so I find myself seeing really ugly realities and putting a frame around them and try to give them balance. And I think the act of photographing makes, for me, it has made life always interesting. I mean, there's nowhere I wouldn't go, or you couldn't put me anywhere where I wouldn't see something. Now I might be suffering, but I think it really does give you, but that's just me. I mean, that's sometimes I wonder whether it is also can be isolating, because it's a solo. I love the solo nature of it. But it is solo. I mean, social distance is not difficult for a wandering photographer. So in many ways. And I think that for me, the photography is about the darkness and the light. And I say that both the visual elements, but metaphorically. And so I think, I don't know. I mean, I don't really understand it any better than anybody else, but I think about it a lot.
I forget to unmute. To quote you to yourself, we've this beautiful piece from the essay that you wrote. We also know the moment to mean the time we live in, the urgency we feel to respond to the ever-changing waters we find ourselves floating in, political, emotional, environmental, and to do it in order to amplify what we see, hear, believe, to share it with others in hopes of revealing our own awakening to a broader audience. I was so surprised. I was sent this piece thinking you had actually written it post and that it was written before
Right.
before the pandemic is surprising to me. And I would love to hear the moment that you're referring to there, this pressing moment that I think we think, well, we had a normal and then we hit this thing, that there was an already pressing moment that you're speaking about here that preceded. And I'm curious what was happening for you.
Well, I wrote that about, there was in 2016, not in 2016, 2018, 19, it doesn't matter. We did an event for the current governor of North Carolina was in Hillsborough, and Roy Cooper, who's done a great job trying to manage this for this state. But anyway, and as soon as that was over, we went to have a beer at this little bar, and somebody came in and said, the Klan is gathered. It's a Sunday afternoon on the courthouse steps in Hillsborough. And I happened to have my camera with me, and so I just went down there. Well, again, the last thing we need is another photograph of the Klan. I mean, in some ways, I mean, I can say both sides of this, and yet I found and they need nobody to pay attention to them. I've always heard they're going to go away if we just don't pay attention to them, and they're going to die out. And I don't really believe that, particularly in 2020. So I just started photographing. I asked them if I could photograph, and they of course said yes. And I started photographing, and I spent about the next 2 weeks thinking, why do I respond to these moments like this? What does it mean to feel like that's what you should do? And the simple answer is, well, that's what I do. So it's like that's what a photographer does, or they don't know any better, or that's what they do. But then I was really trying to decide, is it really okay to look away from these things in this moment? Can we really just decide, well, that doesn't deserve our attention. Let's ignore those people. It's a very challenging sort of philosophical conundrum. I think I go down on the line that we take the pictures and then we figure it out later. And we have this, and I say somewhere, I think in here, but if we don't take the pictures, we're not even having this conversation. And we're not even, and some photographs need to point a finger of judgment, and some need to, clasp hands of praise. And I think we have the responsibility to respond to the moment intuitively as well as intellectually. And oftentimes the intuitive response is way ahead or apart or distant from the intellectual. And so that's really what I was writing about, this idea of a moment and what do you do in a moment. And I think I say, at least for me, that doing nothing is really not an option. You got to do something. And I was fueled with a kind of, I ended up getting in an argument, and anyway, there's a whole nother piece to the story. But the photographs are their own evidence that they were there, but it's also evidence that I was there, and trying to work through what it means to see white people that look a whole lot like me if they took off those silly suits. And that also gave me the kind of privilege, in quotes, to get access, to be able to walk right up and before anybody else was there and take pictures. Again, pictures I'm not sure we really need for, well, I don't know if we need them or not, but that's not the point. I don't know that I can pull those pictures up. I hate to talk about pictures and not look at them, but
I think we'll get to photographs soon. This was another quote from that piece. Visual expression speaks in ways that words can't, and documentary images of the dark as well as the radiant. And I'm wondering if you want to speak a little bit about the radiant, the piece of work in our practice that as you say, can cut through to that beloved community, or cut through to the love in the very act of witnessing and in that very act of engagement.
Well, anybody that's ever taken photographs knows that the engagement often is the experience of making the picture, and the engagement that happens to make the picture is often the most radiant thing for us, and that we can't make a photograph that communicates all of that to anybody else. I think we could probably, everybody on this that's here could talk about, how the experience so outlasts and outlives the actual photograph. What we're always trying to do, I think, is make a photograph that has somewhere close to the lasting radiance or feeling that we had being there, listening to the music, eating the food, seeing the light, hearing the sermon, whatever it is. And I also use the word radiant because I'm somewhat stealing from A.G.'s cruel radiance of what is. He's the one that probably gave me radiant, and I use it over and over as my own acknowledgement of that. Radiant in its most powerful way is a mixture of the dark and the light, or the cruel and the radiant, and that's kind of where we where we are most of the time, is to find those two things commingled and do something with it. I do think photographs can I don't know, can put us in those places of, you use the word, the beloved community. I think they can, even when they're, I mean, Bruce Jackson's film, photographs from prisons, from Arkansas and Texas prisons, horrific reality and gorgeous photographs. It's what, how do we make sense of that? Well, I mean, these are beautiful lives that are trapped in a horrific reality, and so it's not so simple. And the photographs take us to a whole nother level of appreciation of people, of that space, of that endurance, of that prevailing, but also appreciation that somebody paid enough attention to make a beautiful photograph, and then to somehow edit that photograph and circulate that photograph and write about that photograph and care about that photograph. And I mean, I think that shares so much with art in its broadest, deepest way. And I think that's what we're all trying to do in our bumbling, stumbling, underexposed, overexposed way. But there's no question that that this idea of the of light and is where the magic is. And I say that both, as somebody who still works in the darkroom and uses an enlarger, and somebody who loves to see the sun come up and go down, but also that we're always looking for the lightness in any little corner we can find it. But it's always there. That's the good news. Now I sound like a preacher.
I think I saw,
which I'm not.
No, I think I saw Bruce hold up a question. Bruce, am I right? Did you hold up written something? No. I thought I saw you hold up a sign.
Well, you probably did.
No, while he was, can you hear me?
Yes.
While he was talking about, you guys were talking about radiance, I was writing out the cruel radiance of what is.
Oh.
And Tom said the line. It's one of our favorite lines. That's what it's all about. So my question became totally irrelevant as soon as he said it.
Thank you, Bruce. Tom, is there some other pieces you want to touch on? Do you want to show some photographs maybe, or where would you like to go?
Well, let me see if I can manage this thing, and so you don't have to look at me, and you can look at images, and forgive the slowness of my let's see in full screen. All right, is that different?
Yes, it's full
okay.
screen. Mm-hmm.
All right, so we were just talking about light and radiance, and also the selfie, basically, that you're in your photographs. I mean, we are our photographs. My photographs are always about something else, but they're also always about me. And I used to just avoid any presence of myself in the frame, and so I would not have even have taken a picture like this. This is late in the day in the Mississippi Delta, in Gunnison, Mississippi, actually, where a church had burned and all that was left was the stairs. But increasingly, I just, if I can't get out of the picture, I just don't get out of the picture. I always think of my grandmother. This is my grandmother's photograph of their dog long before I was born, in their backyard. Breaking the rule. I don't know if you all ever looked at the rule on Kodak film, but there were little instructions, and it had always keep the sun at your back, and well, if you keep the sun at your back late in the day, you're going to make a selfie like this. I always say this is our first family selfie. I won't. Here's some other of her photographs, and this a family photograph. And I have always been influenced by found photographs, by photographs I've found in family collections, by accidental photographs, and I really do believe that as much as here we are talking about journals and universities, the making of photographs, and this is one of the things, Susan, that you all are doing with Instagram. The making of photographs, the impulse to make a photograph is so universal. We can talk about it in complicated ways, and we can have graduate programs, and there's good reasons to, but we have to remember that that many of our favorite photographs of our own or of other people's were the happy accidents, or were just the convergence of a moment, or the deterioration of a real postcard and somebody holding a fish with a hole in a dress. And we also know that this is my grandmother's photographs of my mother, that every time we print a frame, we've left out way more than we've included. We're always excising the experience. We're always distilling it down to a simplicity, to an illusion. And we lose even these 3 frames lose the time-based experience. But we pick one of these and we don't pick 2. I need to be careful that I get talking here and we'll run too long. But this is one of my earliest photographs I took when I was about 10 with a little plastic camera. And it's, I really show it because it is so flawed. It was a great uncle in Kentucky made these bird feeders, and he would give them out to people. He worked for the Louisville Courier Journal, and he'd make these on his weekends. I don't know. I was too young. I don't know exactly when he made them or how many, but he'd given us this one, and I always, whenever I would look at it, I would think of Uncle Charlie, and so I wanted to make a picture of it when I was out with my camera one day, just photographing in the backyard, the most ordinary stuff. This is hanging over the picnic table in a sugar maple tree. And for all the world, I thought I had made the perfect composition, and I'd actually, I think of it as a example of how no matter, how hard we try, we can't really reach the reality of what we're trying to get. And now I like it so much better than if I'd gotten it right, because of what it says about that, that inability to quite get it. And without all the words I just said, what would you even make of it? So the frame and the photograph can be impotent to a certain point. And then we add what I just did, and it becomes a totally different image. We can add anything, frankly. I tend to like to add what is, back from the cruel radiance of what is. The what is has always been very important to me. Not what I can make up, but what is. And trying to get to that has been key.
Tom, why do you think the what is so central for you? Because certainly people practice photography in a different way. What is that for you?
I've tried to figure that out myself. I think it goes back. I think very early I was interested in other people's lives so deep. I was interested in older people. I started making tape recordings of great aunts telling stories when I was like 12, 13, 14 with a little reel to reel. And I think I'm so fascinated by human actuality, another AG, that I haven't found any invention, anything I could invent that's anywhere near as interesting. So, and I also am, I think the human condition is endlessly, um, there's not a word that every word trivializes what I'm trying to say. The human condition is endlessly what is. That, and that's not to say that there's people make up stories all the time that I love to read and hear about. And there's a lot of photographers whose work I love that are not so wedded to the veracity of what is. But I think that's where it comes from. This is my younger brother who I used to share a room with. This is a photograph I never printed, never looked at, took. He had a pig that, or somebody had a pig that wouldn't nurse, so he bottle fed it and was raising it up to eat it. It's kind of, there we went from the radiant to the cruel. But then we found him dead when he was 52, and so what happens when that happens? Oftentimes, at least with you go back and sort of you want to see what detritus is there. I mean, I went into his house and went through his stuff, but then I go through my stuff, and I love this picture. Even, I mean, as a photograph, even if it wasn't all that. I love, the relationship of animals. I love the way those fingers are on the back of that pig and the lights falling across it. But there's no question that every photograph is about mortality, and some just more than others. Back to the backyard. There was a whole period when my first son Julian was born that I was photographing with an 8x10, using it like a snapshot camera, mostly in the backyard. And this is my brother-in-law, Charlie, after we caught a bunch of fish. And so it's an 8x10 negative that's blurred because it's a long exposure. And the only thing that really holds still in the picture are the fish and the Budweiser. And my son is there in that little swing. Susan, you interrupt me whenever, or anybody else. Everybody can take it off mute and just. But this is this is more interesting. That left mysterious, but it's a folk sculptor, E.T. Wickham's deteriorating site in Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, and he would make these sculptures of famous people that he admired or had stories about, and local guys shot their heads off. And so it's this headless thing in the middle of nowhere that makes no sense. The whole idea of witness, and the whole idea that the injuries of time and weather, which is a line from William Henry Fox Talbot's book, The Pencil of Nature, one of the inventors of the photograph. And Talbot talked about photographing the injuries of time and weather. I don't know that that I can come up with a better phrase for what I think I'm doing. This is a pool hall in Jonestown, Mississippi, in the Delta, that at one time had a full mural of Kennedy and King and some civil rights leaders and a local woman. And this is what happens this is what those marks, Faulkner called marks on the wall of oblivion. You make these marks, and what lasts and what doesn't, and what time and weather do. And how can you tell about time in a still photograph that doesn't move? Can you figure out how to make an image that communicates time, this time? I mean, that gives this sort of temporality, this feel of temporality, in something that's really a static image. Oh yeah. So this might be after this we'll take a little, maybe we'll turn, but there are times I just photograph because I feel like for me not would be irresponsible to me. and this was in Clinton, Tennessee. I was driving down the road, and there was this car broken down the road. This white car, with this Confederate flag. This is 1985, I think, and even then I was puzzled that anybody would drive around with. And I wanted to stop, and so I stopped, thinking I wanted to take a picture, and they needed a jump, and so that's my car jumping off this car. And so in a way, what I did was exchange getting them back on the road with a photograph. And the whole time I was photographing, I'm thinking, is this really right to do this? Because I know what I'm doing, and they don't know they don't know how I see this convergence of them and this hood and this white car and this reflection of this woman in the window. And this all happened in 5 minutes. It doesn't take long to jump off a car and they're back on the road. And that was that. Is that the right reciprocity in doing documentary field work? Did they have any idea? Did they have any idea? Of course not, that I'm going to be talking about this picture and showing them. And yet, what else can you do? You're here once and you'll never pass this way again. And so there it is. And I thought it was important at the time, and I think it's important now. I don't think the pictures are that great, but I think the moment was. Let me come out of this. Or you want to, should we open up to questions? You want me to just keep talking? But that's dangerous.
We can, let's, I of course have a million questions, but I thought I would give some other people a chance if they had some things they wanted to ask, and it might get cumbersome if we don't. I think we could try raising our hands, or we could just try talking and see if two people talk at once. We'll just wait a minute. Does anybody have a question they would like to put out?
I've got one.
Sure.
Hey, Tom. So how do you deal with that conflict of is it really right? I mean, do you just you sound like you just kind of you go with it and then think about it later? Is it impulsively, or do you really analyze it when you're there in that moment, taking the photo of the guy with the Confederate flag on his hood and that type of stuff?
I think I tend to follow my intuition in the moment and my feel for, and I always sort of, I never take pictures surreptitiously. So I always ask, is it okay to photograph? But I think I follow my intuition in the moment, and then I'll think back on it after I get it and try to decide where I am with it. And I'll be honest, I think that, like all of us, there are things that I feel like I'm going to be more careful with than other things. I mean, I don't have, for me to publish a photograph of the Klan that when they decide to stand in front of the Hillsborough courthouse on Sunday afternoon in broad daylight, I mean, I don't feel I need the same kind of permission I would ask from somebody who was standing in the rain under her umbrella in front of the courthouse. I can't really explain all of that, but I do follow my intuition in the moment, and then I think about it after the fact. I'm really not interested very often in taking pictures that somebody doesn't want me to take. And yet I can't always in the moment explain what's going to happen with these images, over time. And whether they're going to, whether we're going to be talking about them tonight. I mean, there's no way to know. But I am very, the last thing I want to do is to invade somebody's space. And at the same time, like this picture that's up there now, I drove by and turned around and said, I'm going back to, I was 22 when I made this picture with a 4x5 view camera. I was just learning to use the view camera, but I turned around, I went and knocked on the door. Nobody was home. I never got permission because nobody was home, and I took the picture and I left. I was nervous the whole time, setting up because I didn't have permission. I feel an allegiance to the people that I'm photographing, and I also feel an allegiance to my own point of view. And they don't always work out, but you hope for the best. I've said many times, if you're one who wants this to all be neat and clean and tied up, but when you go to bed, this ain't the job for you, because it never gets that way, right? It's never completely clear. And I will say that even if you're photographing your family, you're photographing my brother. He would hate my brother, who I showed that, he would not want us talking about him. So
thanks for you kind of confirmed my feelings also. I mean, there are many times when I've felt conflicted taking a photo or even taking audio of somebody who, I have permission, but the person may not speak like, may have just a real Southern accent, and I'm always conflicted. How's this really going to be taken if I put this up on some kind of web document? Is it going to make them look funny, kind of thing?
Well, I think how we disseminate images is the next, like where we let the images go to versus how we make them for ourselves are two different things, right? Because it's true that things can be spun out in the world and get totally misinterpreted as to what you wanted them to be, and that's very complicated. And I think we all wrestle with that. When is it okay to let them go?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Tom, that brings us to this interesting intersection of sheltering in place and people who are photographing their intimate families,
mm-hmm.
and this place. We're in this curious photographic place where public and private are really merged in ways that they maybe haven't been as much in the past.
Yeah, I don't know how many people that are listening or watching or whatever the verb is have had this experience where, I have students that'll say to me that they're really not comfortable photographing strangers and that it's really difficult. And so you bring up the idea, well, what about family? And I mean, we all know that could be even more difficult. I mean, just because, or this issue of like, do I really have the right to tell this photograph of a retired miner in Cumberland, Kentucky? What agency do I have to tell his story? And then you start to think, well, so would it be easier if I told my dad's story or my mom's story, and family is not necessarily easier, or the permission is not, you don't just have a blanket, you don't just get to do anything you want with your family, or at least I don't think you do, any more than you get to do anything you want with anybody else. So yeah, it can be complicated, and yet it can be so collaborative with anybody that it can be a real, what just happened? Did I just go away? I just lost my screen. Am I there? No.
We're seeing your desktop.
You went to screensaver, I think.
Well, how do I get back to the meeting?
I think you're still on the meeting, so that part is good. There you go.
There you go.
Your Adobe Flash player crashed or something.
I just saw Euphus Ruth.
Yeah, I'm running late. I get my time screwed up. It's Eastern time up there. I thought I was early, but not. You know the story down here.
Yeah, running late, perpetually running late.
Dollar short.
Where was I? So I was just talking to Euphis Ruth, and when I photograph in the Delta, we often photograph together, ride around together. So he knows probably more about the way that I do that than. But I think back to this issue of, like, photographing in the most intimate spaces. I just think it's. I don't want to get too sort of philosophical, because I don't. But I think we tend to think we need to go somewhere else, and there's something. It's probably a gift, and I realize this is like putting, a very positive spin, but it's probably a gift to think that, we've got our, what did Faulkner called it, his own postage stamp of native soil. Now, his postage stamp was a little bigger than social distance, but our own postage stamp of the backyard, our own postage stamp of 12 rooms. There is a lot one could do in that space, and we're all going to have to figure out, if we're going to photograph this pandemic, how do we want it to be seen? What do we think we want to say about it? I was reading this letter. I have in World War I had two great uncles who were in France, and they would write home, and they started writing home. And one of them writes and says that, the most beautiful sunset out of my tent right now. He's telling his mother about how beautiful the tent is, the view from the tent. So he's basically describing a landscape painting. And then he goes on to say, I hear the flu is really bad, and I'm actually feel like we're lucky to be over here. Well, he's in France in 1918. I mean, well, that may be, that may have been the best way to render that for him. I mean, maybe the only way. What's the best way to tell the story of now? And it's probably not to overthink it. It's probably not to think, well, what if I go, and stand in front of Home Depot and photograph I mean, if that's what you do, but it's probably better to just start taking some pictures and feeling your way. And I don't say that without realizing that could sound like, you're irresponsibly just going out into the world. You need to be safe, and you need to be safe to other people. I mean, you don't need to take advantage of other people, but I don't think we can figure these things out all in our head. And it may be that, it's not to make any pictures, it's to write, or maybe to make really mundane pictures and write around the edges of them. There's only so much a picture can hold, and there may be more to say than a photograph can hold. Bill Eggleston famously said, words and pictures have nothing to do with each other. I think it's wonderful for him to say it, and it's a great sort of way for him to talk, but it's not true. They often have a lot to do with each other. And is that Bruce Jackson uttering something? No.
Tom, when you talk about, I was thinking of the Kierkegaard line that life is understood backwards and it must be lived forwards. In the moment, we never know what anything. We're just there and things, right? And it's only later that they take on meaning as the narrative formulates itself, reformulates itself, and that changes over time.
Right. What he said. Yeah, so I think that
so many of your old photographs are so.
I lost that. Say that again.
You've shown us some wonderful old photographs that now have, greatly enriched meaning for you because of that perspective of time.
Right.
You could not possibly have had in the moment, which is
exactly.
one of about the photographs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, and I think that's, I mean, what we do know is that this is a transformative time for us. So trust that, and make images, and don't feel like, I mean, this is the conundrum of the social media age. Don't feel like you have to, don't spend so much time posting them that you can't take some more.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, there's really a way in which we can get in our own way, and I don't want to turn into you know, an old film fogey here, but there's a way in which the digital speed has really made it harder to just pile up things and wait for later to reflect on them, and or we take so many that we never can get back to them. I mean, find a way to just catalog. That's why I use that mark on the wall. Just make some marks and move, you know, keep moving.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the best we can do. Now, you know, we want to share work, but we don't have to share everything. And some of the things, you know, and it may be that the work that comes out of this, for some of us, is triptychs and diptychs and combined images, but you're not going to figure that out in the moment. The moment is the moment to take the images. That's the reason I read that Wendell Berry, you know, thing, is it's all about slowing down. I mean, his advice to be a poet is basically to slow down and to turn the, you know, it's prime, you know, blow up the TV, throw away the paper, move to the country. I mean, that's John Prine's advice in that great song. And I think there's metaphorically some real merit. We're obviously all going to read the paper and we're going to check the news, and we need to. But if it kind of absorbs us, it's hard to make it's hard to make anything. And I think that I really feel that we're compelled to make, you know, make something, make that mark. I've quoted this too many times, so forgive me if there are people that, but years ago, I used to frequent a little meat market in Mississippi, and Raymond Dufresne's, who's long dead, owned it. And he had taped on the cash register in his handwriting, "When all is said and done, more will have been said than done." And I've always used that and said that, you know, I think I do this in the orientation of the MFA. That's not what this program's about. When all is said and done, more should have been done than said. And it's the doing that will get us to the place where we've got something to say. And I know that's not, you know, like a recipe. I mean, I just believe that. I just really do believe that. And it is true that what Bruce Jackson just said, you know, we understand things, you know, retrospectively, and we reflect back, and we're going to want to. And for those of us who've been sort of influenced by the archive, and I'm using the archive in the broadest sense, but influenced by, you know, I was really influenced by the pictures hanging on my grandparents' wall. Well, they were from 50 years before my grandparents were around. I mean, there were just layers, and I think we, or some of it, I feel an obligation to leave some of those layers, even if they're fragments. And really, everything's a fragment until, you know, you edit it into something else. So yeah, that's one way to do it. Should I go back to?
Well, I think I wasn't sure. Sometimes things will get scrambled up. Eufus, were you about to ask a question before? Did you have a question?
Oh.
Unmute. Let's see. Unmute. Oops.
Who are you asking that of?
Eufus, Ruth?
Eufus.
No,
I thought he
okay.
was.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, I was muted because I didn't know what comment I might make. So I really don't have a question other than sorry I'm late, and this whole thing about photographing during this time, I was going to take the time and just work on things I've been putting off. And then finally something hit me when I was cleaning up this thicket back here of what I should do to photograph around my place and just stay put. So this morning I left to go photograph in 2 or 3 places that I frequent and where Tom and I go sometimes. And I ended up just riding around. All I could think about was going back home and making a photograph. So that's what I ended up doing. So that's why I was late. I was out here in the thicket.
Well, I hope you share them with us when you're.
That's a great reason to be late.
Yeah.
I went out with my dog yesterday and photographed what she was looking at.
There you go.
That's a great idea. Yeah. Tom, circling back to what you were saying about images and words, when we're getting submissions for 6 Feet photography, and especially through the Instagram, I am just so touched and moved by how intimate people's writing and sharing is, how much, that a simple image will come to us and then somebody will include, 3 or 4 paragraphs of some of the most vulnerable sharings that I have seen. And I am just really touched by how this time of vulnerability or chaos, or where people just aren't oriented, is just opening up such incredible sharing from people. Yeah.
That I think that I do think that writing is in some context, or thinking about words. It could be very few words, but some is probably this moment probably requires it. But there's just no recipe. I think my wife is a novelist, and she argues that the subconscious is much more intelligent than anything else we've got. And how you hitch a wagon to that is hard to know, but there's something to be said for intuition, and following it. And if you find yourself photographing in the thicket 2 or 3 days in a row, there must be a reason. So keep doing it. Trust that lean into the thicket. And that's and yet you may want to go out and photograph other people and photograph how other people are dealing with this. I think there's lots of ways to do it. There's no we all shouldn't do it the same way. Getting out and photographing other people, and or even if you want to go to demonstrations where people are want to lift the lockdown, go to those demonstrations and photograph. I'm not I'm not an editor given assignments, but I think that there's some truth to that. Do what we need to do, and anything. I was talking to one of my students who's just getting ready to graduate. Any image made today is this should take the pressure off. Is a COVID image, right? It's a pandemic image. If it's made in the middle of this, it's just don't feel like you've got to sort of run it through any kind of special filter.
And Tom, I think you and I talked about this too, is just how much I'm noticing how important community feels for people in this moment. We could have tried to host a call like this from Maker Circle or whatever, even 3 weeks ago. And I think people there's a kind of openness and I was mentioning this last night because Click Photography Festival is one of our sponsors, and sponsors actually this track of talks, and how even once a year coming together at that festival and being with each other and in that kind of space where we are celebrating our medium, but also just celebrating each other. And I do think it's this quality that starts to emerge in these times when we slow down, that we have this, the witnessing that you're talking about is not just witnessing the world as we photograph it, but witnessing each other within this tradition. And I've been finding that part of it just really delightful.
I mean, I think I do think the community is a real element to this, because no matter how much we are able to take advantage of the distance, we're all missing pieces of things. There's no question. And I don't know that this, my laptop my laptop can't make up for, having these meetings through my laptop can't make up for everything, but it certainly does create a sense that we're of commonality of experience. And one of the things that is, it's been said many times about a pandemic is it doesn't really distinguish across geographies or social class or anything. And so we're experiencing something, at least when it arrives, very similarly now. It has impacts on us in different ways, depending on where we are, what kind of healthcare we have. And I think those are all things to be thinking about when we think about making pictures, because that's where the rubber meets the road, and it's going to be that way. It's going to be very different. I mean, I don't want to predict, but it looks like, if you're living in Georgia tomorrow, it's very different than if you're living in some other states. Or not, it's not tomorrow. I think it's Friday that you'll be able to get a tattoo or a haircut and all these things that, those are things that if you're interested or willing, those are things to respond to, because, I mean, it gets me agitated to think about some state being that irresponsible. I don't know, what would it be like to make images of that? I don't know exactly. It would be interesting to hear what people are making images of. I could call on a couple of people that I know are on here. Is that fair?
Please.
Phyllis, would you take a question?
Oh no. That means I have to show you guys myself in my pajamas.
Well, you could just be your voice.
No, sure.
You can give me your thoughts, or give other people your thoughts. Phyllis is teaching at Duke right now, or just, I guess classes end tomorrow.
Yeah. Thank goodness for that. But I'm a little scared for the other side as well. I decided to photograph small businesses in the area. So I've been contacting small businesses of all ilks, some that were started 9 months ago, some that were started 50 years ago. And it's slow going, obviously, with access and safety concerns, but there's something, I felt like that was important to me. It was the best way. It was the most interesting to me, and it felt the most right.
Mm-hmm. What were your students photograph? What did your students photograph?
Oh, my students. So yeah, when we transitioned in a couple of my classes, we decided to do group Instagram feeds, and it's called Witness Pandemic. And the students, I noticed the first week of the shutdown, they really didn't know what to do. And now every week that passes, they're sort of gaining traction, and I give them small prompts, like when they're stuck, just to follow the light, for example. So that some are just will spend a week chasing the light around their house. Some have broken in their little sisters and their parents in terms of getting them comfortable around the camera to document life under social distancing. So it varies.
Mm-hmm.
It varies, but I guess, in that kind of small atmosphere for them, having those kind of constraints has actually forced them to chisel away at what they're after. Whether it's people, still lifes, light, poetry.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing those. But I think that, I mean, that she just said what I tried to. She said better what I just was trying to say about, being in the space and figuring it out. I mean, and that doesn't, we're all going somewhere, but we're not going very far. But it's far enough to make images. I'm starting to make 8x10 portraits of people, within the neighborhood of my studio. Just, because everybody's home, and it seems like, and I don't know if I was just so stupid I needed a pandemic to think of that, or if that's a good response to the moment. It seems like a great idea no matter what. Just the exchange and the view camera dialogue that goes on in making a portrait. But so is it about the pandemic? Yeah, in the sense that that the convergence of the confluence, a word I really like, the confluence of people being home, of me thinking about what should I do, of me being in my studio every day because I can't be at the university. It's all it would not happen without this moment. This is the other thing that I'm interested in, have always been interested in, is returning to places over and over again. I photographed this basketball court too many times to admit, with an 8x10 view camera, and for me it's always different. I don't know for the viewer, if you had to see them all, it might not always be different. But I photographed it the first time because it has cemetery behind it. Now I photograph it because it's a basketball court and a sycamore tree, and it's always got this incredible light. And it goes through the injuries of time and weather and transformation that everything else goes through. And people make marks on the pavement and things happen. And yet nothing happens, right? But there's never anything, I mean, nothing, how's this for us? Nothing never happens. Something's always happening. Phyllis, who should I call on next?
I think Rob Amberg is still on here. He's been doing some amazing vlogs. And Rob, do you know how to unmute? He might have been like, I'm out of here. Did he? I think he just.
Let me do the video.
Hey, Rob.
Hey Tom, how are you?
I'm good.
Are
How
you
are you?
seeing me? You're not seeing me, are you?
No, I just see your name.
Wait a second. All right, how about now?
Yeah. See the top
Yeah.
of your head.
Oh, good. That's the best part.
There you are.
All right. How's everyone tonight? Hey, Corky.
Hey, Rob.
So, Susan, did you want to ask me something?
Yeah, I mean, Tom was just kind of asking folks what they're working on, and I can do a kind of shameless plug that you are sharing your blog with us.
So, I had taken, I guess, about 7 months away from blogging and came back to it probably right around the 1st of March, where this thing was when this thing was really kicking off. And I think in terms of my photography, I've always kind of stayed pretty close to home with my work, at least, for a long time. And more recently, I've stayed very close to home. So I continue doing that. I photograph on my walks every day and have tried to, just really look at the beauty of the landscape. I, I've been so overwhelmingly sad by this whole thing, just saddened for everything, for just the way this is turning out and the way the country is turning out and all of it. It just it makes me feel like, God, is this going to be what the rest of my life is like? And so I'm photographing just very close to home, landscapes. And I was on the phone this afternoon, right before this started, with Titus Higgins, who's also on here. You might want to cue him in a moment. But I was on the phone and I was on my porch and I kept looking outside, and the light was just absolutely spectacular in the electric trees, the poplars. And I said, Titus, hang on a minute, let me get my camera. And I just walked outside while we were talking to do that. And so a lot of what Tom was saying about responding, to moments, responding to intimacies. I feel like I'm doing that. Just recently, Leslie broke her foot about a month ago, and so we haven't been out much. But just recently, we started taking some drives and went over to see our old friend Kelsey Green. And I realized that it's really important for me to be photographing a lot, especially the young people in the community and what they're doing and how they are maintaining and how they are continuing to build for their future. That just seems really vital at this moment in time for me. So I don't know if that's a little bit of what I'm doing. I'm being depressed a lot.
Well,
That
sounds good.
sounds good.
I'm getting a delay. Is that just me? You hear me?
I can hear you. I think it was feeding back from Rob, so I put him on mute. So Rob, if you want to talk again, we'll just have to unmute you, just so you know.
Rob, Rob, I like what you're doing with your blog as well.
And I will make a shameless post, a shameless mention here. We are generating content on the 6 Feet Photography site by photographers who are willing to share at this time. And so Rob has done a couple of posts that are very related to this time, and he has shared them with us. And we have a feature section on the website called Photographs to Fathom. And a fathom is a distance of 6 feet, which is interesting, and also measured by the distance of outstretched arms. So we are looking for people who are doing singular photographs that are very thoughtful, give us a chance to sort of fathom this time together and make the distance of separation a little bit more fathomable. And then to also mention, before people start hopping off, that we have, this is a regular series. It runs every Tuesday night. Our next person will be Yin Ang, who is you can see her work up as our featured photographer for this week. She's from Melbourne, Australia. So when she talks to us next Tuesday night, it will be 9 a.m. her time. And also just wanting to encourage people to share and submit. It's a time for generosity and a time for connection and community. And so I will be sending out emails to everyone on this list and keeping folks connected. Bruce, you had something?
Yes, Susan. I tried to record this at my end and couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
I saw you were recording. I would like to share this with some colleagues here. If there's a way you could make it available, I would very much.
Yeah, so we will put this up on the website. We'll announce an event, and then as soon as the event closes, the event sort of announcement stays up with an attachment, but I can also send it as, people can email me and say, it's better for me just to have the file so I can share it, and I can definitely put those out there as well. And yeah, absolutely. And
really great. And thank you for doing this. Thank you, Tom.
Of course.
Sure.
Of course.
I was going to ask Titus before we close.
Please.
Is Titus still there?
We did all the housekeeping, so we can stay on here and talk for the rest of the night if we want. So we can just keep going. And those who have to hop off, thank you for being here. And we're so glad you were with us.
Titus, are you there?
I'm still here, Tom. How are you doing today?
What are you photographing?
Well, so this really came at obviously a horrible time for me, because before the everything started with the virus, I just come back from Cuba from doing the last time that I was working there for my exhibition that was to open up in June of this project that I've been working on for 5 years. So that's been delayed. And so I've been basically sitting around wondering what I was going to do. And because my work is primarily about people, I mean, I rarely do landscapes. But let's see 20 or so years ago, I started working on this piece that was called Dark Hollowed Ground. And it was all about African-American cemeteries. And my wife and I had been taking these little drives out into the country, into the various counties. And about 2 or 3 Sundays ago, I decided to stop and reignite that work that was about the cemeteries. And so I'm also writing some a little bit of prose on my IG account that goes with it. And the title of I've sort of given it a title to try to help me figure out what I'm trying to do, is salvation in the time of COVID, inside of COVID. Last Sunday, I actually got a chance to go out and I shot sort of dangerously, and I don't advise anyone doing this, an outdoor church service that was on the sidewalks of East Durham. So that's sort of what the work that I'm doing.
Those pictures were beautiful. They were powerful. I saw a few of those that you posted, and pretty powerful. Yeah. Thank
you. I appreciate that. So that's, it's about trying to figure out where I'm going to go next. But I have to admit that because of the nature of how we're forced to work now, I am having to go back into the past and start redoing some things in the ways that I used to. But I'm still very much intellectually and visually always looking to photograph people in some form of spiritual exaltation.
Great. Well, I think I'm really, I wish we, the beloved community metaphor that we had earlier would have us stand here all night and looking at everybody's work. I you know I think it's great to hear from a few people to realize that there's no I use that Yeats line, surely some revelation is at hand, that I don't have any more grasp of the revelation at hand than anybody else. And I think that one of the ways to propel our work is to realize that we're all in it in the same way, and that there's no authority. Nobody has the ultimate authority on this, and we need to exercise our voice and say what we've got to say. I never read out loud but the end of this essay that Susan talked about, I see now why she thinks I might have written it after this, because I said, now more than ever we need nuanced documentary expression to hold the present up in stark clarity, a kind of mirror of our moment. We need those images that leave us wondering whether we are in the past or in the present. Documentary stories that challenge us to see the darkness and light. What we thought or wished was gone is clearly still in our midst. To look away, to not record, is always a choice, but that is akin to refusing to listen to calls of admonition, or to the satisfied laughter of community, or to the howl of the lost and forgotten. There is no future in doing nothing about what we see around us. The documentary moment is never generic, is never without particularities of place, weather, politics. This moment we live in now, it seems, has more dark clouds than clear skies. If we are to make an honest rendering of this time, we need to include these shadows within, those shadows within, and among our images of more cherished light. And I think, that's both the call and the opportunity, I guess, was what I would say. It's a big table. There's room for a whole lot of people, and we all ought to be making them. And I think, Susan, what you're doing to kind of open up the non-curated sort of open door is really, really valuable. Because as Rob said about sort of looking to younger generations, I mean, this is it's hard to know how defining a moment is, but this is, this moment will define much, and finding ways to understand it and articulate it, comment on it is so important. Photography is one way to do it. And to open that opportunity and is so valuable, and I really do appreciate you sort of bringing us all together.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a pleasure. And I know I forget to mention this, but I know we have some educators here, and just to let you know that we have a student part of this project that is emerging, ways that we are connecting students with each other, and we have a student call for entry. And our hope, our fantasy is that students will actually curate that section. So we certainly have the infrastructure to start collecting the images, but we're hoping that as students leave school, that we can keep them engaged in thoughtful conversation about what's happening. And to do that, we can create platforms for them to keep exploring both meaningful content. And I do also want to say that while there is this piece of emphasizing the young, as you just said, I also personally am grateful to you and to others who hold the history of our medium in such a beautiful and thoughtful way, Bruce and Tom, and so many folks that help us frame this moment inside of the history of the tradition and the medium is at least grounding for me, and it keeps me it keeps me in that in the here and now, and that practice. So I appreciate that so much.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And thanks to everybody that joined out there, wherever out there is.
Hey, Rob, did you have something to add?
I just wanted to thank both you and Tom for, Tom, thank you for, coming to Western North Carolina and doing this with us. Wish you were
Anytime,
here
Rob.
in person. Wish you were here in person, but I'm sure. But anyway, thank you very much for doing this.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
Susan, you pulled this off beautifully.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, this has been great. It's wonderful.
Well, let's see. Rob is queued up as one of our presenters. We're not exactly sure we're getting the timing right, so y'all can keep an eye out for that.
Yeah. Yes, might take 2 eyes. All right, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you so much for this. And I'm sorry it took a crisis to bring us all together.
Right.
This was absolutely wonderful, folks. I'm glad to have had a chance to see and hear so many of you. I've heard about many of you from Tom for years. And so thanks, everybody. It's been great.
Well, I hope we can keep the conversation going. And what I love about this is that I will meet people here that will be the next invitation. So I'll be sending Bruce an email. And Titus, I'm excited to connect with you more. And what we love is this could just keep going. We could just have a year-long conversation where we get together and just pick a different person each week. So
Great.
excited about that possibility.
Tom wrote me yesterday and said, we got to figure out. And you just did.
That's great.
Excellent. Tom, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Susan, and thanks to everybody that's joined and participated. And let's do this again.
Yes.
All right. Go forth. Be safe. Wash your hands.